All right, here we go. Another True Brew Bobcast here at the end of Detente Road in Youngsville at Cafe Detente. We have Miss Shera Lapoint with us this morning. This is going to be a great episode. A big, huge fan. So, an investigative genealogist from Kaplan. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Well, we better jump into some content.
How did I get here? How did I get here? Yes, absolutely.
Let's start off with how does one become a genealogist, and tell us your trail.
So, the answer to that, I think, is you have to be curious. I always, growing up, I remember asking questions, enjoying stories that my grandparents told me. I was very lucky to have all four of my grandparents until I was 45 years old. My first grandfather died when I was 45. And I just remember always questioning them, about their parents, things like that. And I guess I felt like I kind of had an old soul because I loved hearing the old stories. And when my first grandfather, my grandfather Broussard, died in 2006, I really realized that I didn't know a lot about his family. I knew that his parents had died young. And my Broussard family is actually from Milton. My great grandparents are buried in Woodlawn Cemetery on the river. So I remember talking to my dad, asking him questions, and Dad couldn't even tell me his grandmother's last name. He did not know. So I joined Ancestry, and I started looking for information. And amazingly, at that time, my goal was to build a family tree that I could share with my children. So I put myself and my husband Paul on the same tree, and that's where I started.
So when you first started, you were just curious about your family tree.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just, I was certain that my parents were my parents, but I felt like I needed to know more. Some wise man once said, and I heard this one day, if you know where you come from, it's easier to figure out where you're going. And that quote has always stuck with me because, in my opinion, it's very, very true. And that's what motivated me, I think. Who are these people that I came from?
So were you suspecting some misinformation and stories with your family,
Yeah,
or
I mean, I can tell you one. I said my grandfather Broussard's parents died young, and I had heard different stories. My I remember my sister, who's a year younger than me, telling me they died in a buggy crash. They drowned in the Vermilion River. And I said, I don't ever remember my grandparents telling me that, but it's possible. My aunt told me she remembers that her grandmother never got out the bed after the baby was born. And so when I started looking at all these dates and this information, it kind of didn't make sense. My great grandmother died 3 years after her youngest child was born. Okay, and I'm like, 3 years in the bed after a childbirth didn't make sense to me. Anyway, I ended up going to state archives in Baton Rouge and dug up death certificates. In 1928, my great-grandmother died of tuberculosis. 4 years later, my great-grandfather, Oliver, died of tuberculosis. And 4 years later, their oldest son, Allison, died of tuberculosis. And now we know the real story.
So was the true facts different from?
Absolutely.
So how much of that goes on because it's either a misinterpretation or sometimes a deliberate story.
Absolutely, absolutely. Another story, to show you. One day, Paul and I were talking with my maternal grandmother about a murder that happened in his family. And my grandmother told me, she said, my mom told me that I had a grandfather who was killed by his brother. He shot him in a fight over a cow. And I was like, my goodness, what a story, Never heard the story again, never mentioned it again. I'm doing research. on my Dortez side, and I find a newspaper article. Fratricide. Brother kills brother in a fight over a cow.
There it
in
is.
French. It's written in French. It's written
There
in
it
French.
is.
There's the story. And my uncle could not believe it because my grandmother never said anything about that to the family, But she remembered her mama mentioning it. So, yeah.
And it seems though generations past sort of would bury a story and
Yeah.
just sort of, if it's a bit shameful or something, they won't talk about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's one amazing thing. When you start as a genealogist or you do your DNA, you need to realize that secrets are going to unfold. There are many interesting secrets out there, and sometimes I think my grandparents are rolling in their grave when they
Yeah.
if they realize some of the stories that have been uncovered.
Okay, so all right, Shera, let's get to. So, did you have to go to? Now you're interested in genealogy. You're intrigued with it. You're diving into it. So, how did you get further education?
Okay, I don't have a college degree in any kind in genealogy. I was actually an executive secretary and a bookkeeper, but I have taken many hours of online courses, in-person courses regarding genealogy and DNA. And I also speak and give classes, DNA workshops, speak to libraries, social groups, and things like that. So.
Right. And you have a book in.
I do have a book that is in the making, that is being written, and it's about my DNA journey. It's basically kind of the story that I'm telling you today. A lot of how I got into it, stories that I've come across, and the interesting things that have happened. So.
What will be the name of the book?
It's called The Gene Hunter.
Gene Hunter.
The Gene Hunter, yes. So I have a
Love it.
a good business associate who tagged me with that name, and that's the name of the book.
I love it.
Thank
So, all right. So we'll get to a couple of the cases, but before we get into those, a lot of your work, from what I understand, is just helping people who were adopted and has no trail to their birth parents, or people who suspect their birth parents, or maybe perhaps discovered their parents weren't their real parents, and here we go trying to find out. So, is that accurate?
That's very accurate. That's how I got started in the DNA side of things. Yes.
And was it out of you just want to help people out, plus you kind of like being this investigator?
Yeah. So there's, I've always liked games and puzzles, and in 2016, actually it was 2015, I guess, the fall of 2015. A commercial came on TV, and I told my husband, I said, I want to do my DNA. And so he said, go ahead and order a CECHA kit, and we did. And a couple of things happened at that time that really set things off. One thing was my oldest grandson's mother had found out that the man who raised her wasn't her biological father. And
how old was they when they found out?
So she found out at 17, but she probably was, at this time she was maybe 21 or 22 when she found out who her actual father was. And her father ended up being a very good friend of ours.
And I don't want to interrupt your story because this is important. Did she suspect something? Like, is there something in there where you're like, this isn't my real mom?
So I think, it wasn't her real father. And I think there were probably things like looks in this case where she probably suspected. But honestly, in this case, what happened is someone told her. And I'm going to be honest with you, it devastated her. And, oftentimes that's very difficult for people to deal with. It's a very emotional roller coaster to find out that, the people that you thought were your biological parents aren't your biological parents. In her case, though, things have worked out amazingly well. Just, she has these two families now, and everything's wonderful. Another thing that happened was I had one of my mother's first cousins is actually my age. He was best man in my wedding, and he was Paul's best friend growing up. And his parents divorced when he was an infant, and he had been told that his dad wasn't his dad. Now, this gentleman was my great uncle. He was my grandfather's brother. And my great uncle died, not, my great uncle thought that this man wasn't his son, and the son thought this probably isn't my biological father. When I got my DNA results, there he is, right up at the top. And I realized he was my great uncle's child. And it destroyed me because my great uncle was a great person. I loved him very much.
So you had a first-hand missile.
That was an awakening for me.
And so
I wanted to know how this worked. What does
I know,
this
but let's
mean?
try to put words to
Okay.
that feeling, because did you feel deceived at the time, or like
You
you're
know,
saying devastated?
I felt sad. I felt sad because
You missed out on something?
I did. I, you know, this cousin really didn't come play at my grandmother's house, because when his dad came to my grandparents' house, he was with his mom, and there was an issue there. And so I knew that he was supposed to be my cousin, but yeah, I really felt like I missed out a lot on that. And not only me, the I know what it was to be a mother. I know what it was to have parents and grandparents who are wonderful people. So what did he miss out on? And oftentimes we don't realize the consequences.
Well, you mentioned something on the previous story that someone told your
Right.
cousin. I would think that, okay, this is a conspiracy. Who knew this the whole time?
Well,
So do you feel sort of,
I've helped. I've helped well over 100 adoptees or people who did not know their biological parents, and oftentimes, the people feel very deceived. They're angry. They're upset. I have come to realize that we don't know what the situation was in any of these cases. You don't know what those people were going through at that time.
but you want to judge,
You want to
but you
judge.
can't.
But I have learned, I could never give up a child. I couldn't. I can't give up a puppy. But I have come to understand that there are circumstances and things that happen in life that are oftentimes beyond our control, beyond our control. I've seen a child given up for adoption because the mother was Baptist and the father was Catholic, and her parents refused to let them marry. And here's this man, 50 years old, finding out who his biological parents are and what happened in the situation.
Seems unnecessary.
It definitely seems unnecessary. Definitely seems unnecessary. And, you have situations where an adoptee will contact family, and they will, that mother or that cousin, someone has been looking for them for years and years and years, and it's wonderful. And then you'll have situations where that mother is going to deny till her last breath that she gave a child up, and I can understand that because I don't know what that situation was. There are bad things that happen to people, and it could have been that.
Lots of trauma in there.
Yeah, lots of trauma in there. Lots of trauma.
Well, and then you have all the social layers, and surely in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, when no birth control and a lot of things happening and hormones flying all over. And then military. Yeah.
I can tell you a large percentage of the cases that I have, adoptee cases that I have worked, absolutely are related to the military.
Well, let's talk about that, because we had a brief discussion on that. You're saying a lot of your trails run and it hits a wall in the 1860s. So what we concluded was after the Civil War, the Union troops came through, a lot of affairs taking place. They go back home to North Carolina, Virginia, or wherever, and your trail runs cold there.
Absolutely, absolutely. There are a lot of situations that happen in history that have affected the paths that I go down looking for this. One thing, absolutely, was slavery. In Louisiana, it was a part of life. It was a way that people lived, and when you're searching a lot of these family lines, you get to a point where you can't go further back because you don't know who someone's father is. In the military situation, wars happened. World War II, men are being sent off to war. Dancing was a huge thing in the 40s. They had these wonderful nightclubs. In Bunkie, they had the Blue Moon. There's some Blue Moon babies. There are some Blue Moon babies.
Yeah, there is.
They had soldiers coming from Alexandria, and the beautiful young women going and dancing and having fun, and men going off to war, and they may never come back again. And it was part of life. And then we, even nowadays or 20 years ago, things situated around military bases. Where soldiers are sent to California and they're fixing to be shipped off or whatever, and
And they come back different, man.
and they come back different men, and I mean it oftentimes it wasn't a relationship, it wasn't a long-term relationship. So
Well, hey, we were all young.
So you see, or I've seen a lot of those situations, and wonderful stories actually, heartbreaking stories, but also many situations where things just absolutely have ended up wonderful.
Well, let's walk people through it. So, okay, I suspect my dad's not my dad.
Okay.
I contact the gene hunter
Okay.
and I say, okay, I've been having this feeling, la la la, shish goomba. I'm consulting with you. Where do we start? Walk us through.
Okay. Well, the first thing you need to do is take an autosomal DNA test, a direct-to-consumer DNA test. Ancestry, family tree DNA, 23andMe, MyHeritage, Living DNA. Those are the top ones. So
Let's stop right there a
Sure.
quick second. Tell us, because 23andMe is still, I don't know, what, 10, 15 years old maybe?
oh gosh,
But fairly
yeah,
new.
fairly new.
So
Yeah,
the
yeah,
DNA bank
correct.
is growing. How can you give us an idea how big it is?
Oh my gosh. So when I started this in 2015, if I remember right, the
10 years ago.
Ancestry database was about 2 million, and I think it's 26 million now.
26 million.
People have tested, I believe, on Ancestry alone. So the banks have absolutely grown tremendously. Okay. And you are also able to test it, basically one of these companies, and upload to others to use those results. Like you could test it Ancestry or 23andMe, and you're allowed to upload to Family Tree DNA and MyHeritage. So
The banks are
the
communicating.
banks are communicating. Most of them are communicating. And we also have a site that's called GEDmatch, which two brilliant gentlemen who were genealogists started. And if you put your information on GEDmatch and you tested at 23andMe and I tested at Ancestry, we can see if we match each other. So that gives me a bigger pool to search through.
So once you go public, it's the cat's out of the bag. There's really nothing you can do about it.
So honestly, there are ways you can not put your personal information on there. You can use an alias name. Okay. You can choose to not have your information shown to other matches. Okay. Anytime I work a case, whether it's personal or law enforcement, the trees I build are private and non-searchable. You absolutely can do that. Okay. So to say that your information would be out there, we pretty much can hide it. Now, you're going to have a number on GEDmatch, and people are going to see that they can match
it,
you,
but it's a number.
but they don't have to know who you are.
Okay.
Okay.
That's cool.
Now there'll be an email attached to it, but nowadays you can kind of, I don't have to give that information out, and I don't give that information out unless you want it given out. Okay. So that's how it works. So I would recommend you test at one of those companies. And then when the results come back, we're going to get a list of names of people you match and how many centimorgans you match them.
How many what?
Centimorgans.
What's that?
A centimorgan is a rule of measure for DNA. There's a chart we go by. You match a parent about 3,500 on average. You match a sibling about 2,300 to 2,500 on average.
Now we're talking DNA matches.
We're talking DNA
we're
matches.
in the DNA
We're in the
jar here.
DNA.
Right.
If I'm looking for your family, I'm going to use the DNA. Okay. A grandparent. Things get more complicated as the relationships go further back. A grandparent, aunt, uncle, half sibling, niece, nephew, all match about the same area, about 1,500 to 1,800.
But if it dings or
Yes.
matches, something's happening.
Something's happening. Something's
Okay.
happening. So what's done then is we sort the matches. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If you match someone as a second cousin, that means you share great grandparents. Okay. That's the common ancestor. So if I can look at those matches and see who common ancestors are amongst the matches, that's also going to be your common ancestors.
So now you got faces with the string lines and all that going on. Now the puzzle gets interesting.
Now the puzzle gets interesting because instead of building the tree from me back through my ancestors, I start at these ancestors and build the descendants. And if you were born in 1950 in Lafayette, Louisiana, I look for all that information. Who was in that area at that time? And try to put the pieces together. And you also look for marriages, because when you sort these matches, in a perfect world, you're going to have your 4 grandparents' sides. And they're not going to be related, and you can separate them.
So you would say, okay, I see something happened around in my case, it would have been the early 60s.
Okay.
And so you say, okay, I have this uncle here or this grandpa here. They had these children. Who might be a male in this age group?
Yes.
And
yes.
what was,
yes.
oh, you was in the all field.
Right.
Oh, you
yeah.
was.
Yeah. Now, adoptees oftentimes have what's called non-identification information from the adoption agency. Okay. I worked a case where one adoptee knew that her father was one of, the father was one of, I think, 5 children. One was a doctor, one was a nurse, one was a pharmacist. So, when you work that information, you find these marriages amongst the 4 grandparents, say, and then you look at their children. And if you have that information, you can use it, okay? Sometimes we don't have that information. And oftentimes, because I am Shera Lapoint from Kaplan, Louisiana, the cases that I come across are Cajun or Acadian lines. And our ancestors back to the late 1700s that came to Louisiana
Came from all over the place.
But if they were Acadians, they settled in little areas and they married each other. And so you find that I still have a DNA match to someone in Nova Scotia at 100 centimorgans. And I pretty much match everybody south of I-10.
That's awesome.
And it's very, very difficult to separate those lines because, for instance, my father-in-law is a Lapoint. after I married my husband, my grandfather told me, my grandmother was a Lapoint. I'm like, Papa, I never knew that. My father-in-law and I match 5th to 7th cousins 13 different ways on the Seymour, Broussard, and Lapointe lines.
But that makes sense if you do the math on population and all
Absolutely.
that stuff.
People didn't travel far.
The world was much bigger then.
Absolutely, and you have we have lines. I mean, I have German lines. I have different different heritages, but their islands are the same thing. The hills of North Carolina. People didn't travel far. Sometimes you get frustrated. Like, could they at least not cross, or could they at least have crossed the parish line? But it didn't happen. It didn't happen. So it makes it more difficult, and for that reason, I think I feel like I became better at what I do because I had to dig deeper and learn the differences, and these tests, they give you an estimate. There's no way Ancestry knows that John Smith is actually your second cousin. They give you an estimate of what John Smith could be, and it's up to you to figure out the relationship. And that's what a genetic genealogist does.
So when somebody comes to you to help find a birth parent, what is your message to them? What expectations do you set the table with?
Okay. First of all, there's no guarantee that it can be done.
So
okay.
You get that straight.
That's it. And second of all, they have to understand that they have to be ready to accept whatever the consequences are of this.
So you're a truth teller.
Absolutely.
You're saying,
and you can't. I believe that everyone has a right to know who they biologically are, but not everyone has a right to a relationship. That is between those families and those people. I can't guarantee that. And I honestly...
You're honest with them.
Yes. And I will look at the results, and if in my opinion, there's no way that with the results that we have there, it can be done, well, you either need to put your information on other sites or you need to wait till you get better matches. Okay. So, I mean, I had a case, the first adoptee case I ever did. The gentleman contacted me because he was a DNA match to my daughter-in-law. Mm. He was born in Baltimore, Maryland. Mm. And I told him, because I had been learning and reading, and I said, I've never done this before, but I think I can at least look at your matches and tell you if you match her on her mother or her father's side. And so he said, sure, let's give it a try. I found his mother in 5 days. And I found out that he was one of 8 children, the only one adopted out of the immediate family. Mm. His mother had given up other children. Mm. But they were all still kind of in the family, and most of them knew of each other. Mm-hmm. So one of the brothers was actually looking for this brother that he knew had been adopted out.
They were looking for each other.
And he told me, he said, and I'm going to tell you an amazing story. Their names both were Robert. He told me, he said, you've changed my life. This was the brother who had been looking. He said, I had been searching. I was told he died in a car wreck. I was told all these things. And I didn't think my brother was alive. And he said, you've changed my life. And that changed my life. That changed my life. I was like, this is amazing. I still have goosebumps thinking about it, It's just amazing.
Well, it's a wonderful service that you provide, and it's... And you do. You're changing people's lives. So how did that story end? Did they remain friends?
Absolutely.
Did they find some more siblings?
So I found, yes. So he got to meet his grandmother. So he was actually in the military in Japan when this happened. Okay. I believe he's living in the Philippines now. And he got to meet his grandmother. He got to meet, I think, a few aunts and uncles and cousins. And it has ended up, well, I'm still Facebook friends with all of them. I'm still Facebook friends with the uncle who gave me the information when I contacted him. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it did end a good story. Now I found his mother in 5 days. The father took me 2 years to find.
But you found him.
We found out who he was. Yes, he never did make contact with the father. Um, and it was a very difficult search. It was Polish lines that I followed, and when you have recent immigration, it's difficult to do that. And his father ended up being a smith from upstate New York. Still don't know where the Polish comes in. The DNA led to Polish lines, but the man that we found, if you search his family tree, there's no Polish lines in it. So somewhere something happened. We call it a non-paternal event, and the DNA didn't actually lead to Mr. Smith, so to say. Okay, so
So you helped solve over 70 cases?
probably over. I think at last count that I actually counted, I was at 126 adoptee and non-paternal cases.
Curiosity.
Sure.
How many cases that it was a magical night and the soldier goes off, or two ships passing in the night and the father has no idea that he has a child? Out of in your
In my case, I'm going to say over 40%.
God, that's
I'm
a
going to
lot.
say over 40%.
That's a lot.
And I've worked cases that once the mother was found, she told the adoptee who the father was, and she had it wrong.
Now we're on Jerry Springer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
no judgment. We're just
no,
talking DNA here,
I
man.
mean, I know that she honestly, I think, believed that that's who the father was, or is that who she wanted the father to be?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like I said, you just don't know what's going to surface when you work these cases.
So, I've read a little bit about adoption syndrome. Is it? It's sort of like the feeling, sort of a syndrome, like you feel like you were sort of rejected some kind of way.
Yeah.
Do you run across that?
Yes, absolutely run across it. You know, again, it goes back to, I believe that if you know where you came from, you know where you're going, or it's easier to find where you're going. And, not that these people aren't loved, but I knew who my biological parents were, but I still felt a need to know more about who I was and where I came from. And I can understand that feeling. And yes, it's not that they aren't loved most of the time, but they just feel different, and they feel like they want to know more about who they are and where they came from.
Do you find the family unit is more healthy when they speak of adoption at an early age? Because I'm not judging. I'm just like,
I'm going to tell you,
what's the best way in your opinion?
in my opinion,
Okay.
an open adoption where, the person at least knows that they're adopted. If you, in this case of the first adoptee case that I worked, okay, he got upset with his mother, when
His biological?
His adopted mother, because we did find out that she knew the real story, okay? And he was upset, and I told him, I said, you have to understand, she has been protecting you. She has been, in her mind, she was protecting you from what she thought was bad. So again, it's a case by case.
Is it a stigma thing that because I never viewed it that way. I thought it's a beautiful thing.
I do too, but there are some people who are secretive, and there are some people who feel like I guess, it might be come down to embarrassment. They feel like they have to hide things, and especially during the times in the 40s and 50s and 60s, it wasn't a good thing to be pregnant and not married. And, to, and then I guess also if you're not able to have a child, if you're physically not able to have a child, do you want everybody to know that? So, I mean,
It's complicated.
It's very complicated, and
Yeah,
it's
is.
very complicated. I just feel like the cases that I've come across, when the person knew that they were adopted and they were mentally at the point where they wanted to do a search, the outcome for them has been better.
So let's get to discovering the biological parent. What is your experience? Is that some good coffee?
That's amazing coffee.
Um, what is the general emotion range there? Are they relieved? I mean, where do those stories end?
So, I mean, I've seen it all around, and to tell a 80-year-old man who's in the military who wanted to marry the woman that was pregnant, but she knew she would have to move back to Louisiana. Mm. And at that point, she felt like that wasn't the right thing for her to do. And I am the one who called this gentleman. And I said, sir, you have a daughter. And he said, I think you have the wrong person. And I said, sir, her mother's name was.
Right.
And he said, oh my God, you found her. I still want to cry. And I'm still friends with those people.
So did you connect them?
They have connected. They have a wonderful relationship.
But how much time and energy and love was
they
lost?
Lose? How much?
I mean,
but
that's the tragedy.
We are who we are because of what happened.
Yeah.
And I also tell, I have friends who were devastated when they found out that their father that raised them was not their biological father. But do you realize that you wouldn't be the person that you are? Your children wouldn't be who they are. Your grandchildren wouldn't be who they are if that hadn't happened.
Absolutely.
It's amazing. Think back through time of every single instance and every single thing that had to happen for you to be here today.
Hey, I'm a universe guy, man. I'm a universe guy. I believe in all that kind of stuff, and I love it. So what about shenanigans? Like, I'm sure there was some shocking discoveries in some of your deals. I mean, without naming names, can you give us a little?
My own personal family. Like I said, my grandparents probably rolling in their graves. Absolutely, there were secrets, and I'm going to tell you, before I started this work, I expected this on my paternal side. I'm going to be very honest with you. And I found a half-brother, okay? I found a half-brother, which I'm going to tell you is probably one of the best things my dad ever did. But I'm angry because my half-brother passed away. And I'm angry because I wasn't given the chance to know this child.
You were robbed.
I was robbed. He was robbed, and I was robbed. And I'm upset about that. And I gave him permission to punch my dad in the nose if he sees him. Because I was robbed. I was robbed of having a sibling. And that's my feeling. Was
he older or younger?
He was younger. I'm one of four. My parents had 4 children. My youngest brother was born in August of 1970. And my half-brother was born in November of 1970. They were both diesel mechanics. They stood alike, looked alike. Oh. We just lost out on that relationship. And that's my opinion. I just think in that case, a secret wasn't the best thing to keep. But I understand why the secrets were kept also.
You were just sad.
Yeah, I was sad. Now, other family secrets. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I've given a DNA test to a relative only to find out that his biological dad was not his biological dad. And he's very open about it. He's also found out that I believe now at this point he has 16 half siblings, no full siblings, no full siblings. So that's life altering to a point for a lot of people, and that's difficult for a 50-year-old man to handle, much less an 18-year-old child. But you know, it's not. It's not. I don't want to say it's anybody's fault. That's not the word I'm looking for. These people need to realize that, again, they are here because of what happened. And I don't think anyone should look at that as a negative. You could be upset at your father or you can be upset at your mother, but honestly, you are who you are because of their actions.
I kind of call it like the fog of war, too. When it's happening and you're saying, there's this family dynamic here, this is my best play. And sometimes some people are left out of information or whatever, because if it comes to light in the 60s or early 70s or 50s, it changes all of this dynamic. So who are we to judge and question what was happening then? And so, but DNA is a game changer.
DNA does not lie. DNA does not lie. And I'm going to tell you, I have ancestors who had no idea DNA was going to come back to bite them in the butt. To put it lightly, yeah. I promise you, absolutely have family. And it's not only me, it's all over the place.
And look, I don't talk about religion and politics at the cafe. But if you remove religion, just not trying to offend anybody.
Right.
If you just put human beings naturally going around, then it's pretty natural for DNA to be passed along and spread around or whatnot. I mean, I know I'll get some flack for that, but my point is that that's just the way nature is.
We are all human.
Yeah.
We are only human. And yes, and who would have known, who knew in the 50s that Watson and Crick were going to come up with this thing called DNA, and who knew that we were going to be able to spit in a tube and get all these answers,
So do you have any cases where it's kind of a dead end, but you're sitting there and sometimes you get this new information come in and then bing,
yes,
we
absolutely.
got a bing.
Absolutely. Sometimes you're just like, I don't know where this is going to go. I need more information, and somebody new DNA test, or you find another connection,
No clue.
I mean, that's kind of what happened to the first case that led me into law enforcement.
Well, let's go into law enforcement. So let's talk about. Why don't you? Do you mind? Can you talk about the Texas case?
I actually can. I can talk about the Texas Killing Fields case.
All right,
yes.
Texas Killing Fields case.
Yes. So
now you were on a few TV deals of whatever.
Yeah. Some TV and lots of podcasts and things like that. So
okay.
It's quite interesting. So we lived in Houston from 1983 to 1987, and Paul went to the University of Houston Optometry School, and all this was happening back then, and from Houston to Galveston, I believe it's about a 45-mile strip,
and for the audience, that was what they called the killing field.
It was dubbed the Texas Killing Fields, I believe,
what
by
years?
the media. So from the 70s till the 90s, okay? So there were bodies found up and down this corridor, okay?
And what were they suspecting?
So they suspect serial killers, pretty much.
Killing dumps.
Killing dumps. You have to understand that area was very remote, and it was oil field. It was transitional workers. Okay, the League City, Kemah area, they had a strip, NASA Road. It was a bunch of bars, nightclubs that these people who worked,
And the
lived.
victims, were they mostly
They
women?
were women. They were women.
Were they
Found
working women, like any prostitution there or anything?
so in this case, no. But there were drug issues
Okay.
with I believe a lot of them.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm familiar with the Janet and Jane Doe who were found off of Calder Road.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and these bodies were found in a field. Believe the first one maybe was someone on horseback. There was a horseback, a barn you could rent horses and ride around the area. And the when Jane Doe was found, and she was named Jane Doe, and then they found another body and they named her Janet Doe because they already had a Jane Doe. So what happened to me was I got a phone call. First of all, I have a nephew who lives in that area. And he called me when he heard this story on the news that they were using DNA to try to find this.
So they had
woman.
DNA sampling evidence.
They at this point they had DNA sample, okay, from because they were trying to identify the body. It was an unknown person, unknown female, two of them actually, and they said that she has Cajun connections. And I believe it was even on the news here in Lafayette. Okay, yeah. So my nephew Armand had contacted me and said, Shera, did you hear about this? I'm like, yeah, this is pretty interesting. Well, a few days later, I get a phone call with 281 area code number. I think it's my sister calling me. And it's League City Police Department. Detective Tisdale explains to me that they're working this case and that my father-in-law, Paul Thomas Lapoint, is one of the highest DNA matches to this body found in the Texas killing fields. And I'm like, wow. And, if you know anything about DNA, he matched about 232 centimorgans, which should be about a second cousin level. Not always in Cajun land, but anyway. So, and they had contacted a genealogist in that area whose actual specialty was Italian lines to see if he would help them. And we kind of joined together. I said, I'll volunteer to help you, and worked the lines to put this information together. And, I got to a point where I told him, I have family who migrated to Southeast Texas for work in the 40s. And I think this is a Cajun family that moved to that area, and we're looking for somebody definitely in that time slot. Well, I'm working the tree. That was probably January 9th, and we get to January 29th. And when I'm telling you, while I work this case with Detective Tisdale and the other genealogist, we're working 10, 12 hours a day building these family trees. I probably have 2,000 people in this tree. I'm not cooking. I'm not washing clothes. You're just really focused on what you're doing.
Yeah, you are.
And at this point, we got a break in the case in that the FBI contacted Family Tree DNA, Mr. Bennett Greenspan, and they uploaded Janet Doe's DNA to Family Tree DNA, and they got an uncle match.
Okay.
And they contacted the uncle's daughter, and she said, yes, I had a cousin who had disappeared. And Detective Tisdale didn't tell me that. He called me, and I guess they were trying to put the pieces together. And he said, I'm going to give you a man's name, and I want you to build his family tree. Well, it was the uncle. And when I got to his grandparents, I had the grandparents in the tree. Wow. So we knew that all the DNA went together. Yeah. And they contacted, she had a sister alive, and her sister is still alive. And, yeah, and they...
So did you get to talk to any of the family?
Oh, yeah. I actually still talk to her sister probably once a month.
So what do you think happened?
So...
What do they suspect?
Honestly, I don't know that there's any DNA that is going to lead us to find, who her murderer was. And I don't know. I'm going to tell you, Emotionally, I was not ready for the emotions that came from this. I went to the area where the bodies were found. I kneeled at those crosses. There's a church that owns the land now. And to think that for 28 years, her bones were in a box on a shelf and nobody knew who she was. Not that her family wasn't looking for her, but the pieces never got put together. The pieces never got put together. And I, she lived in the area. She actually lived in Ville Platte, Louisiana for a while. She married a man from Ville Platte, left there, was born in Port Arthur, moved to Ville Platte, moved back, lived in Austin for a while. So,
How old was she when she died?
I believe 34. I believe 34.
And she was just living in that area?
She was living in that area, I think, working on the NASA Road area, probably at the bars there. And we don't know. And you can, of course, you can see all the Texas killing fields information that's out there. I believe, there is somebody who thinks that they know who possibly killed some of the girls. I am going to tell you, I don't think it was one person. It was a dumping grounds. And so when you have that kind of transient area, drugs involved, things like that, it's difficult. It's difficult to know. I don't know that we're ever going to know the answers. I know that she was a beautiful woman, and she was somebody. She was a mother. She was a sister. Had a family who did care about her.
So it's more than just closure. If you disappear,
yeah.
So now they know for sure, at least.
Now they know for sure. Whether they're going to know for sure what happened to her.
So what's the total amount of years from her disappearing to them finding out?
So I believe they think she disappeared in July of 91 because they had some kind of a record of maybe her Social Security use or something in July, and I think she was found in September of 91, and she wasn't identified till January of 2019. So I think it's 28 years. 28 years. Imagine not knowing.
Oh, look, I tell you. I know, especially if you're a parent. So if it went from 2,000 to 28,000 in your 9 years of getting into this, where do you see this thing in regards to general genealogy and crime solving and those kind of things? It's just going to get harder and harder to get away with things when that bank gets bigger and bigger.
Absolutely. And this is a brand new field. I had an FBI agent tell me one day, he said, if somebody would have said 20 years ago that the FBI was spending millions of dollars on drug informants, people would have laughed at you because it just wasn't done. But nowadays, that's how they get the answers. It's the same thing with this process. This is such a new baby field, almost to the point that there are no rules and you have privacy issues. And so we're at a point now where we're at the forefront of forming this most amazing tool that can solve crimes. I can't imagine anything else like it.
But the pushback on privacy.
Yeah.
You're gonna have a lot of constitutional people saying, "Hey, man, that's Big Brother. The government has no right." But what is your attitude towards that?
So my DNA is everywhere out there, and I'm gonna tell you, if they want to know, they're gonna know. But I understand that there have to be rules. There have to be laws made. You have to have a system in place so that we can preserve this most amazing tool for the future. You don't want it to go away because it's so good. But who's going to make the rules? You have the judicial system.
Yeah.
You have the law enforcement system. You have the genealogist. You have the scientist. It needs to be a combined effort. You need, and it's being worked on. And
Needs
I
to
get
be done responsibly.
responsibly.
Because I think about, my wife is into the Innocence Project pretty hard. How many people are wrongfully put in jail? We can talk 3 hours on that.
Absolutely. I think that's even worse. I
Oh,
almost feel like if I was to sit on a jury, to put an innocent person in jail, it's horrid. It's horrid. And
or people
so,
that's been in jail that you could just
yeah,
and but why is it? Why does it take 100 years to get DNA done this day and age to free someone? To me, it's more complicated than that because the DA or whoever or whatever needs to protect. It gets
it's just
complicated.
the system is broken. The system is broken. If you ask me, it really is, because there's so many things out there to me that could be solved. So many cases. Or number one, if it's a cold case, you have to have a law enforcement agency willing to open it up. Number two, you have to have the funding. That's a problem. It is a problem. It is a problem in small town America. It is a problem in big town America.
But if you're poor man or poor lady
I,
is stuck in a jail, it
I,
doesn't make it right.
it doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it right. I mean, in my opinion, this is so amazing. There could be a point where you could solve crimes in real time, in the
Yeah,
future.
that's what I'm thinking.
I mean, you really could.
Well, even if it's a process, you can eliminate things.
Exactly.
Okay, you're
But
eliminated. So,
again, who wants a database with everybody in the world's DNA? I mean, you talking privacy
oh,
issues,
well, you talk about
You
fire
talking,
some people up.
so I get it. I get it. I really do. And the answer to me is being educated. Not everybody is going to want their information out there. I'm going to tell you, I have children who have not DNA tested.
I
And I
haven't.
have family who are like, tell me where to spit, you know? So it's an individual decision.
Yeah.
And it's about being educated. And when I work a case, all I get is a list of names. I don't get your DNA code. I get a list of names of people you match.
So you try to go in any type of adoption or criminal or whatever. Your rule of thumb, if I understand what you're saying, is uh, don't theorize on anything. Just let the facts and the DNA take you to where it is.
I have I
Because
have
that'll get you in trouble.
I have gone off on tangents before, because I'm going to tell you looks. I worked a case. If I showed you a picture of this man that I thought was the adoptee's father and the adoptee, you'd bet $1 million right now that it was. They aren't even DNA related, and they look just alike.
And the
You
opposite
have,
too.
yes,
Nah,
yeah.
nah. Oh, yeah.
You
Well,
have to follow the DNA, and I have to keep that focused. I have to keep that focus, because that's where the answers are. Absolutely, that's where the answers are. That's where the
wow.
answers are. Yeah.
So, where are you now with your what do you call this? This is more than a hobby.
No, this is, I guess it's my profession now.
Yeah.
I remember telling my kids I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grow up. I want to be a genealogist when I grow up. And now I'm actually working for DNA Labs International, which is a privately owned lab out of Deerfield Beach, Florida,
Yeah.
that has been in business for 20 years. And I'm doing genetic genealogy on their cases. And I still do DNA talks and, local libraries. And I work adoptee cases. I'm at the point also now where I have associates and friends who do this. Many of the adoptees that I helped are now doing this to help people.
Well, that's
So
cool.
it's awesome. And
And
so
y'all
we formed
network?
a network. We have a network. So if somebody contacts me who's an adoptee, or even a family member who's figured out that their dad isn't their dad, if I don't have the time to work the case, I know somebody who is willing to help out. And so I have everybody that I have come in contact with doing this. has been put in my path for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely believe that. And the people that I have met doing this just have enriched my life. Absolutely enriched my life.
But there's so many wonderful stories out there. And what I find, doing these podcasts and just the whole cafe deal is everybody has a story.
Everybody
And
has a
some of
story.
them have remarkable stories.
Yes.
And not often are we asked about our story.
About our story. Yeah, yeah.
So there's so many wonderful stories out there.
Yeah. I'm Shera Lapoint from Kaplan, Louisiana. My claim to fame is I learned to walk on the pool table at the Four Corner Bar in Holly Beach, Louisiana.
I know it.
And
I've been there.
You've been there. And, it's like, how did this happen to me? And Bob, I'm going to tell you, I never saw this path coming. I did not pick and choose to do this. Mm-hmm. This was put in front of me.
Yeah.
And, God has led me. I haven't said I'm going to take this path and I'm going to do this. I just basically let it happen. And I just am totally in awe every day at how this happened and where I am.
Well, I want to send this message out to folks in our generation. Once your children are raised, there's no place for a rocking chair. No. Find out. I started a cafe. Shera's a genealogist. There's so many cool things out there to be involved in and do it. I have asked Shera, not to put her on the spot, to jump on the get a towel on the Cafe Chronicles, our new newspaper. And maybe we can take a case or two. I know Dee Dee, my wife, would love to help you out with it. I mean, she couldn't be here today, but maybe we can do kind of a series,
right?
Since your family's close by, and maybe take everybody down one or two of the cases and sort of walk us through it in a chronological way. Can people get in touch with you, or
absolutely?
How are we going to do that?
I'm all over the place. Actually, my grandkids are amazed. They Googled my name the other day, and they're like, "Gammy, did you know you're on the internet?" So yes, I'm on social media everywhere, either as the Gene Hunter, Shera Lapoint. My phone number is 318-240-3742. Perfect. And anybody who needs any kind of, whether they need help genealogically just to build family trees. I personally don't do that anymore because I don't even look at my own family tree anymore, but I know people who do and who love and are passionate about what they do. So
hey, absolutely. We're just trying to make good things happen.
That's it. Yes.
And it's all fun. Well, everybody loves a good mystery.
Everybody
and we're gonna reel you in here to the cafe and tee up some mysteries and talk about this. There's a lot of the cases we were speaking a little bit before yesterday that Shera can talk for 5 hours about.
I can talk for days.
Right. And we're going to get her to do that, but we'll limit the podcast to a little over an hour here today to keep y'all interested. Hey, thank you so much for coming by the cafe.
You're
I know
very
we're leaving a lot of cool stuff, but we're going to get you back. Y'all look for the Cafe Chronicles. Get the app. Go to your app store, type in Cafe Detente, Detente. Get the app, and that is the Cafe Chronicles. It's our newspaper where we have amateur correspondents from all over Louisiana or outside Louisiana who report into the cafe, and we basically give each other news. So I call it escape your algorithm. And so I think I found my new best friend right here because this is some cool stuff.
It is. It's quite amazing. Quite amazing.
Well, thank you for coming. We're going to call this a shoot for right now. We're going to see everybody later, and Thanks for coming by.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Cheers.